Tuesday, July 1st, 1941. In Russia, Stalin returns to the Kremlin after spending some days isolated at his dacha following the fall of Minsk. As president of the recently established State Defense Committee, he requests armaments from the American government. The Panzer Divisions of Army Group North, under von Lieb, cross the river Divna and take the city of Riga on the Baltic coast of Latvia. At the same time, German troops coming from Norway attack Sala. A train leaves Leningrad for the Soviet heartland, carrying some of the most valuable treasures of the Hermitage Museum under the supervision of Vladimir Levinson. Army Group Center, under the command of Van Bach, reaches the river Beresina, a tributary of the Dnieper, on its way to Smolensk. Joachim von Ribbentrop, the German foreign minister, puts pressure on the Japanese government as a signatory to the Tripartite Pact to declare war on the Soviet Union in order to force the Red Army the fight on two fronts. In North Africa, in Egypt, General Claude Auchinleck replaces General Archibald Wavell as commander of the Allied forces in the Middle East. Wednesday, July 2nd. At Hitler's headquarters in Rastenburg, East Prussia, Poland, the first disagreements emerge between members of the OKW over the carrying out of Operation Barbarossa. Reports from the front are unreliable, often containing incorrect information about enemy forces. Furthermore, Hitler, convinced that he is the greatest leader in history, continually interferes, imposing his views on the Wehrmacht strategists. In Moscow, Stalin meets Foreign Minister Vyacheslav Molotov and Lavrenti Beria, chief of the Security and Secret Police Apparatus, NKVD, to consider the possibility of starting secret negotiations with Hitler to see on what conditions the Germans would be prepared to halt their offensive. On the battlefield, the frontline forces of the Red Army have not managed to stall the advance of the enemy. Marshal Timoshenko strengthens the central part of the Stalin line between Smolensk and Moscow. In the United States, American Army experts have succeeded in deciphering Japanese telegraphic communications. Roosevelt's rearmament policy has increased the number of soldiers to 1.5 million and the number of aircraft to over 6,000. In addition, the American Navy has decided to send patrols to the North Atlantic to locate German submarines and to pass the information on to the British and Soviet fleets. Thursday, July 3rd. In Moscow, Stalin addresses the Russian people for the first time since the war began. He adopts a patriotic tone, repeatedly using the terms brothers, friends, and Mother Russia. He invokes the unity of the Russian people to achieve victory over the enemy. He encourages guerrilla warfare and the use of scorched-earth tactics, urging partisans to fight behind the enemy lines and carry out acts of sabotage. Collaborators, deserters, and anyone who fails in his duties will be shot, he warns, and the enemy and all his accomplices must be hunted down and annihilated. Soviet mechanized corps in the central area of the Stalin Line launch a counter-offensive to stall the panzer divisions of von Bock's Army Group Center. The Luftwaffe make their presence felt, and the Russians withdraw. Units under von Lieb in the north establish bridgeheads in the Polosk area on the River Dwina. General Franz Halder, Chief of the General Staff of the OKH, Supreme Command of the Army, who has recently made the cover of the Time magazine, commits the same error as Hitler by underestimating the capacity of the Red Army, saying, "I do not think I am being too optimistic if I say that the campaign against Russia could be over in a fortnight." Friday, July 4th. In Russia, the panzer divisions of Army Group North, commanded by von Lieb, advancing on Leningrad, repel a Soviet counterattack and destroy 140 Russian tanks in the area of Pskov on the river Velikaya. Guderian's Panzer Division, the spearhead of the Army Group Center, reaches Bychov on the river Dnieper and manages to cross, but is then pushed back by a Soviet counterattack. In the south, Hungarian and German forces occupy Kolomia and Stanislawow in western Ukraine, near the river Prut. In the wave of the Wehrmacht advance, the SS unleash an unprecedented reign of terror, murdering thousands of people. A British convoy carrying supplies and armaments to Murmansk on the shores of the Barents Sea in northwest Russia is spotted and attacked by German planes and submarines. In the Middle East, in Syria, after a long siege, Australian and British soldiers occupy the historic city of Palmyra in the desert. In East Africa, in the south of Abyssinia, Ethiopia, 7,000 Italian soldiers surrender to Allied troops. Saturday, July 5th. At his headquarters in Rostenburg, East Prussia, Poland, the Nazi leader delivers one of his long monologues to the Army High Command, relating to the second phase of Operation Barbarossa. The important thing now is to exterminate the Bolsheviks. We have to allow the inhabitants of Moscow and Leningrad to starve, given that keeping them alive would be very expensive for the Reich. Afterwards, we will level both cities to serve as an example. In the place, Moscow will create a huge swamp and not a trace of the city's existence. He concludes by saying that Germany must push its borders to the east and under no circumstances allow any military power within 300 miles east of the Ural Mountains. Hitler is convinced that soon Germans will be able to take their holidays in the Crimea. That will be our Côte d'Azur on the Italian Riviera, he says. In Spain, the first volunteers of the Blue Division set out from parts of the country to join the war on the Soviets. In South America, war breaks out between Peru and Ecuador. Sunday, July 6th. In Russia, Army Group North reached Tartu, east of Lake Peipus, and to the northeast of the Gulf of Riga. Relations are strained among the commanders of the Army Group Center. Marshal Hans van Kluge, commander of the 4th Army, repeatedly complains to von Bock and the OKW about his lack of control over the armored units under Hoth and Guderian. Walter Brandbaustich, the commander-in-chief of the army, advises him to let them have some leeway. From Tokyo, Soviet spy Richard Sorg informs his superiors in Moscow that the Japanese government has decided against attacking eastern Russia, as the Germans want them to do. Stavka, the supreme command of the Soviet armed forces, orders the transfer of troops from the east to the west. In the United States, the American government decides that escort warships should accompany British freighters sailing between North America and Iceland. In the Sea War, the British Admiralty announces the sinking of the passenger ship Anselm by U-96 under the orders of Heinrich Lehmann. The vessel, which had been converted into a troop ship, has been torpedoed 300 miles north of the Azores Islands as it was sailing from Gourock, Scotland, to Freetown in Sierra Leone. 250 soldiers drowned.